If you want a symbol of humanity, the handaxe is it. Everybody who makes one, everybody who handles one, immediately feels connected to it. Archaeology is the study of humanity through its material remains. So we replicate their technologies because it teaches us about the choices, the decisions that are needed to get there. From an evolutionary perspective, they're really interesting because they also tell us what cognitive skills are needed and whether you need language and teaching and these other important things that have evolved in our past.
Those only early tools were literally a couple of flakes knocked from a cobble, and it then develops through things like hand axes, which are bifacially napped, into the Middle Stone Age, which becomes more developed further still.
There's two ways of making a handaxe. There's one way you start off with a giant flake, which you've detached from kind of a cliff face, and then you refine that flake down. And then there's the flint method where you've got a nodular flint and you remove all the flakes to reveal the kind of statue within. With both of them, it starts off with large, hard hammers, what we call a roughing out phase. You kind of get control of the edges. And then you move to what's called a refinement phase, where you try to thin the actual blank down. You try to remove mass from the centres without shrinking the edges. And to do that, you really need a soft hammer. Now, in the European context, the best thing to do that with is some kind of antler. You thin your tools down, and you create this kind of thinned tablet. And then only in the final stages do you actually refine the shape down and produce the culturally accepted, this is our tribe's way of having this handaxe.
And so these are hand axes, and they persist for an incredibly long period of time. And they increase in refinement over that time because you have symmetry, which is arguably not functional. It doesn't necessarily increase the utility of the tool for butchery, for example. There's people are spending a significant amount of time on those artifacts that they don't really need to spend. I think that's the critical point.
The handaxe itself as an artefact, it's the first time humanity put form onto something. And in doing that, they didn't make a better functional tool. It didn't butcher an animal better. It was probably actually slightly worse in some respects. And that raises questions of why would you do that? Why do you want something that looks nice?
There are examples that are particularly indicative, I think, of tools being made for symbolic purposes that are not functional. So one is the assemblage from Fersplaat, where you have exceptionally large hand axes that seem quite unwieldy, that are not really made as tools. And the other example is the West Tofts hand axe from Norfolk, which is actually napped around an inclusion quite deliberately. So there's a shell that must have been uncovered at some point during the napping process, and the maker has subsequently made that the centerpiece of the hand axe. That's expressing, I think, a clear aesthetic sense. So in the late 90s, you have Conan Mythen coming out with what has become known as the sexy hand axe hypothesis. And that's part of a growing body of work, really. It's an extreme example of a body of work that sees things like symmetry in hand axes as being some kind of social signaling. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. So we have examples where this is not purely functional. This is showing an aesthetic sense, it's symbolic, and therefore I think you could quite reasonably say they are an art form. you.